Thanks very much for coming along to tonight's webinar, which is around the net zero all electric home. Before we commence, I just want to do an acknowledgement of country. And by doing so, I wish to respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations, of where I'm casting from today. They're as the traditional custodian of our lands and waterways in the area where we're located, and how they and First Nations people tread softly on this land for 60,000 years or so. I honour their ongoing connection to country and pay my respect to their elders past and present as well. Just to let you know, this initiative is part of the Solar Vic program that we've been running for quite a few years now. So it's made available through funding through their training and workforce development program as well. Just before I introduce Jeremy as well, if you have a question, if you can jump in the Q&A section and write your question in there, we'll endeavour to answer it as we're going along or towards the end. So I'll try and make Jeremy aware of that. So please put any questions you might have in the question and answer section of the meeting here. And now I'd like to introduce Jeremy Spencer. So I want to thank Jeremy for making himself available again tonight. Some of you may have seen the video we put together a couple of months ago now, where we went through one of the houses that Jeremy built. That's available on the Master Builders Victoria YouTube channel. I'll post a link of that in the question and answers as well. But Jeremy's a builder and director of the successful design and building company Positive Footprints. They've been around for quite a few years now. They're an award-winning design and construction company dedicated to making high-energy performing homes easy to achieve and affordable. Jeremy Spencer is a registered builder and energy rater in Victoria with a Bachelor of Arts and Teaching degree, and he's passionate about spreading the message of environmentally sustainable design and to help bring about change in improving the way we build homes as well. Jeremy's also a member of the Sustainable Builders Alliance as well. So I'm sure he might talk about that as we go through as well. So I recognise a few familiar names on the list of attendees tonight. So thanks again for coming along, and I'm going to hand over to Jeremy to start his presentation.
All right. Can you hear me, Phil?
Yep, all good.
All right, beautiful. Thanks everyone who's turned up and given this Monday night to looking at this. Hopefully I'll give you some food for thought and maybe even some direction on how to achieve a net zero all electric home. A little word of warning, I think we're going to run at least a full hour, so let's see how we go. I've got a bit to get through, not only to prosecute why this is a good idea, but also give you the mechanics of how to actually do it, so I'm hoping to cover a bit of ground. All right, today's discussion, we're going to look at the net zero all electric home. Quick discussion on why aim for a net zero all electric home. What I see as a problem with the way we're currently envisaging net zero, and what I would suggest is a better standard, and some real world examples that Positive Footprints has been able to achieve. So you can see what I think is possible and realistic for the market. Then want to get into the mechanics, how to set up for a net zero all electric home, starting with preparing for success, minimizing energy demand, the first big step, and then moving on to power production and storage, the mechanics of a net zero solar home, followed by any question. Now, I think Phil might read out any questions along the way, and he can be a judge of whether to jump in there or not. All right, let's get into it. Part one, the net zero all electric home. Why aim for a net zero all electric home? Well, there's three main reasons why this is a good idea. Firstly, to reduce carbon. Anyone who's seen my slides before may have seen this one. I've been using this black balloon for a while. The average home, by burning fossil fuels to provide the power, is responsible for the release of 5 tonnes of carbon dioxide every year for the life of the house. Good news there, 2 bits of good news. The first bit of good news is with a net zero all electric home, we can get rid of that altogether. The other good bit of news is when I first started doing this, well, over a decade, 15 years ago or so, that was 6 tonnes plus. So we have been lowering the carbon intensity of the electricity grid by adding more rooftop solar, more renewable energy utility, and getting rid, let's say, getting rid of old coal-fired plants that aren't performing very well, retiring them. That's the word I was looking for. Okay, that's the one reason. The second one is to enable the green transition. That sort of follows on from that idea of a greening grid. So the idea of the green transition for Australia, if Australia is to actually meet its 2050 target of net zero carbon, the idea is that we put all buildings onto the grid, all electric, all industry onto the grid, all transport onto the grid. And then if that grid can green over time, well, the whole of Australia greens with it. So that's the idea of the transition. Now, homes are really important in that transition. In fact, they're foundational, I think. 24% of the electricity currently used in the grid goes to residential construction. So what we build and how much demand it has a big impact on the electricity needs and the infrastructure we need to build for the grids. Every 5 or 6 years, we add about 1 million homes, 200,000 or so a year we aim for. And if those homes aren't built in an energy efficient way, well, that just adds on more infrastructure that we need to build out to meet demand capacity. That's one thing. But our homes also now with rooftop solar are becoming net contributors, or can be net contributors to powering that grid. And also with the battery rebates and batteries coming on board, they are not only contributors, but they also help to balance the grid by storing that power during the day when it's created and releasing it at night. And they're also going to be the garages of the future, or the service station of the future, when we've all got electric cars. That's the way things are heading, and we'll be charging our car at home. So they're also going to be the transport, hubs or power hubs for our transport. Very important where homes can be placed in this green transition. And the last reason, and probably the most important for the client, is to reduce the running costs. That's the big promise of an all-electric home. That'll reduce running costs and give family, more resources to spend on what matters. All right, but now let's look at what is the problem with the current way we're envisaging net zero. What most net zero homes are currently achieving. Okay, here we have a graph of the predicted energy use for a 7-star home in Canberra. This one's got a photovoltaic system. What you're looking at there is you can see each month of the year along the bottom. Above that, you'll see hot water is in sort of the blue aqua color. Hot water is pretty consistent throughout the year, so stays the same over all the months. Household loads stay pretty consistent over all the months. You can see in the darker blue, there's some cooling in summer, not very much because it's Canberra. And then there's a lot of heating in those winter months when it gets quite cold in Canberra. You can also see and that's in the red. You can see that yellow line. That yellow line is the solar contribution, because it's got a 7 kilowatt solar on its roof, producing a lot of power during the summer, less in winter, and more at the other end, the summer end on the other side of the graph. Down the bottom also, you can see those bars. That's for each month of the year. And what that shows, it's from January to April, it's producing more power than it's using. In the winter months, it's using more power than it's producing, and again, producing more power than it's using at the end. So that's what you're looking at in the graph there. If I highlight the solar contribution, this is what people usually think about when they're thinking about net zero. They're aiming for annual net zero. And what you're looking at there is a house that's producing as much power over the year as it's using. But if you look at that, you can see what the problem is. The problem is the graphs don't align. All right, so what's the problem? First of all, in the warmer months, this house produces more power than it's needed, but only during the day when cell prices are marginal. Everyone's producing at the same time in summer, prices are very low. And not only that, that extra power to the grid can help to destabilize the grid a bit. At night time, you've got these hot water and household loads remain high, often at night when demand is high and prices are high. So if you're running appliances at night time, you don't get any solar contribution. You still got a big bill. In winter months, solar production is less and not meeting demand. At night time and even on cloudy days, you'll find that there's a large energy demand for heating and little to no PV production, particularly at night, of course. This will be at peak times when everyone's needing heating and prices are high. So with this net zero home, what's the outcome? The outcome is that house is still expensive to run, drawing most of its power at peak times when prices are high. Even if it had a battery, this house is not making enough power in winter to fill it. It would be pretty good in summer, actually, that said, but in that middle part of the year, it's no good if you've got an empty battery. Its demand outstrips the solar resource. And the house is still a big drain on the grid at peak times and is not helping that green transition. It's just adding to the load on the grid. All right, so instead of this, what should we be aiming for? What I'm arguing that we should be aiming for is not that, but first we should take an effort to reduce demand before we put on solar so that we end up with something like this. This is what I'm calling monthly net zero, or potentially some people call it a seasonal net zero. But the idea is that every month you're producing, on average, enough power to run the house. It doesn't mean that on any particular day you're going to do that. If the conditions are bad, you won't produce the power. But on average, you'll have enough. You'll be producing enough power to run the home. All right, why is that good? Let's look at some examples. So here's a case study of two of our Carbon Zero series. This is a series that Positive Footprints have created and built over the last 5 or 6 years. I want to show you 2 homes worth of data. This is lived-in data from families living in the home and their energy bills. This is not predicted data. So here's a house. It's an 8 over on the side. Right, you can see it's an 8.3 star home. This was before whole of home, so I don't have the whole of home score of this one. The clients are a young family. They've got an outdoor pool on this one. And if you look on the graph itself, the green bars are each month of the year. And they're showing, the green bars show energy that is exported to the grid. So this is surplus power that this house has made and sent out to the grid. And above the line, that is power that is drawn in from the grid. And so what it's showing is that on every month, this house produces more power than it brings in from the grid. So it is what they'd call monthly net zero. This house is in credit, $300, saves a lot of carbon. But what I find amazing is not this house, but a very similar house, very similar floor plan, actually, even though the house looks a little bit different, but it had a battery. So I want to show you what happens when you've got a monthly net zero profile and you add a battery. And that is house number 2 here. House number 2, 13, the previous one was 11.6 kilowatts, I think it said. This one's 13.1 kilowatt PV with a 13.5 kilowatt battery. This house is not a young family, it's an older couple this time, but they do have an electric car which also runs off the house and saves around about $800 a year on this. But let me just focus a little bit on what I think are the important particulars of this and the lessons that we can draw. If we look above the line here, you can see that there's an extremely low demand on the grid. We could have another 200,000 homes each year put on the grid, and it would add very little to the infrastructure required, because most of what this house is doing is what they call behind the grid. It's on the house side. It's producing its own power, running it into the battery, drawing from it at night, and really not interacting with the grid very much at all. Importantly, though, that gives a huge amount of resilience, because this house could potentially, in a blackout, go through a blackout and just keep running for potentially months on end. So it's a very resilient home, first of all, potentially. If we look at the energy that this house sends out to the grid, the renewable power that goes out that offsets carbon dioxide, the amount of renewable power is enough to power this particular house 2 more times. So we could have another 2 exact homes like this being powered by this house. So this house really is an energy hub. And you can imagine if this house was in a bushfire area, and God forbid there was a bushfire, if this house didn't burn down, well, it could run a lead out to the houses next door, power them, potentially power anyone with an electric car and really be quite a useful thing in that community. If you look at the number of kilowatt hours that are sent to the grid of renewable power, green power sent to the grid that offsets fossil fuels being burnt, well, there was 9,224 kilowatt hours exported. They've got a feed-in tariff of 6 cents. That gave them a credit of $553. That's instead of the Victorian average electric gas combined bill of 2,228. Plus, they've got that $800 of petrol savings because they're powering their car from their house. So this house is a very low cost living lifestyle. And lastly, all of those kilowatt hours of renewable power sent to the grid mean that you've saved carbon dioxide being released by fossil fuels supplying that power. So it saves around about 10 tonnes of carbon dioxide instead of creating 5 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So it's a carbon negative footprint. So when someone asks me what a monthly net zero home is and why it's good, I say it's a resilient home, it's an energy hub, it's a low cost living lifestyle for the lucky owners, and it's also a carbon negative footprint that helps the green transition. Okay, if you want to know more about that particular home, I'm not going into the specifics of it, but I did do, if you're interested, I did a webinar, a case study on the Sustainable Builders Alliance website, and you can go and have a look at it. We also looked at the embodied carbon and did a case study on reducing the embodied carbon in that job as well. So if you're interested in that, that's where you'd go. All right, part 2. That's sort of the why it's a good idea to move in this direction for our industry, or at least start producing homes and seeing where it goes. Part 2 is how to set up for an all-electric net zero home. First part is to prepare for success and minimizing the energy demand. So when we're thinking about minimizing the energy demand, there's a number of steps to go through. So I'm going to do a very quick run through of what those steps are compared to the average home. I like to show the strategies that are important, and I like to show how they would how much energy is saved compared to the average home. So here's an average home, and I once again, I do often use this, but I think it's a very good structure to be able to visualize what's going on and to remember. So here we have a pie graph. This is a pie graph of the average home energy split. So if you averaged all the homes in Australia and looked at where they use their energy, you would get 43% of it go to space conditioning, water heating's 22%, lighting's 4%, cooking is 6%, and appliances 25%. Let's put on a cutaway of a modern all-electric home so we can see the good bits inside. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around each wedge in this pie graph and show you the things that you do to an all-electric home which minimize the energy use vis-a-vis a standard home. We'll see what we get. So here are the steps. Let's start with the space conditioning wedge, 43%. And the strategy here, of course, is to start with good design. That's really the heart of sustainable design, is designing a house for the climate that it's in. If you design a house for the climate that's in, then it needs less energy to heat and cool. And what I'm talking about here is passive solar design. Passive solar design using the sun, using mass, using ventilation, using insulation and windows in the right spots. Those principles are foundational to getting a good outcome, and they're also the cheapest way to reach 7 stars and beyond, instead of trying to achieve that by putting in higher and higher spec materials. Now, if you do, I don't have time to go into the fundamentals of passive solar design. I have done that in the past, however, and Solar Victoria are currently subsidising what was a course for free access. And if you did go to that website and you downloaded the first module, that goes into all the fundamentals of passive solar design and how it all fits together if you want to get running on that. The other big tip that I'd give you for good design is to get a thermal performance assessor on early. while the design is still fluid. That way they can use the software. The NatHERS software was always intended as a design tool and produce an optimized report, so you can optimize the design and increase the star rating and the performance of it while it's still flexible to do so. So you do those two methods or those two strategies, and you'll find 7 stars is easy, whether you do it or your designer. Someone in your team do it. You'll find that it was easy for the designer to get to 7 stars or 8 stars or 9 stars or 10 stars, and to do that in the most cost-effective way with that design. All right, so that's the first step. That'll give you a score on paper, but it doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how the house is going to perform in the real world, because a lot depends on, what does it depend on? It depends on performance construction. Was the house built to perform to its energy rating? So when I'm talking about performance construction here, I'm really just talking about whatever system you use. Are you building it so that thermally it can perform to what it should do on paper, so you can get those energy benefits and energy savings on the ground? Now, once again, that is a whole nother series of webinars, really. But to get you running, on the Sustainable Builders Alliance website, I did create a quality assurance checklist tool. I use standard construction in the way that our company builds, and this is a tool that I put together over time that I'd suggest you can look at and potentially give to your project manager if you're a builder or your build team. And it's really just a little tick sheet to do little checks along the way at each stage of construction to make sure that the house maintains its thermal performance throughout the build so that you can achieve that energy rating. All right, so assuming you've got a builder who has systems in place so that they build to meet their energy rating, you should be able to achieve 7 stars, 8 stars, 9 stars, or 10 stars, depending on what the rating is. You can see how important that potentially is. And in fact, in Victoria, it's even more important because we're a colder state. And this is the average for the national PI that you're looking at. In Victoria, Victoria's PI, that space conditioning wedge actually goes past the 50% mark. So it's the shell is very important, getting the shell right in Victoria. All right, but let's say you've got to 7 stars. If you look at what's remaining on the pie, we've got some energy savings there by good design and good construction. The rest of the energy savings just come from efficient appliance selection. So it's really just substituting out appliances that you may or may not use now for efficient ones. Let's start by looking at what's left in the space conditioning wedge there. How can we minimize that? Well, the appliance of choice here is a reverse cycle AC. I'm sure most of you already knew that. A reverse cycle AC is a heat pump, or it's a type of heat pump. You might have even heard it called a heat shifter. But it's one of the technologies that makes the net zero project possible. This heat pump technology. It's quite miraculous. What it allows is it allows for the motor on a reverse cycle air conditioner to shift more power, more heat than the electrical energy that goes into it. So for instance, it might take 1 kilowatt hour of energy, say, to run the motor for an hour, but it can shift using a refrigerant loop. It can shift up to 3 kilowatt hours of heat. Some can shift 4 kilowatt hours of heat, and the very best can shift about 5 kilowatt hours of heat. So it can effectively make heating and cooling just runs in the reverse direction, can make heating and cooling with a fraction of the energy of standard appliances or standard space conditioning units. So if you put on an AC heating cooling system, you can effectively make your heating cooling with a fraction of the power, as I've done there. All right, let's look at the water heating. Water heating, 2 technologies to consider. First technology is the humble shower. 50% of your hot water goes through a shower head. If you use a shower head, a 4A shower head rather than a 3A shower head, you'll make a bit of a saving, potentially up to 25% on your water heating bill because you're not making as much hot water. The next technology is heat pump hot water. Again, this is the heat pump, and This time it's taking heat from the air and very efficiently putting it into the hot water tank. And if you choose heat pump hot water, you can effectively make that much hot water with a fraction of the power again. If you do get heat pump hot water, by the way, make sure you get one with a timer on it, because we're heading towards putting solar, or I'm suggesting that we put solar on these homes to make them net zero. You're going to be making a lot of power during the day on these homes, and you may as well be dumping the excess power that you make into your hot water. That's one of they call it load shifting. So hot water is a good thing to put into the middle of the day when you're making power. Any pool pumps or pool heating is good to put in the middle of the day, as is car charging. Lighting. Lighting's only a small wedge, but it's an easy wedge to make a little bit of a saving by choosing LED lighting throughout, which is standard these days, but also choosing pendants and then just considering the wattage that you're putting throughout the house. So this is some lighting design advice. Living spaces, choose bulbs that give 1 to 2 watts per square meter. In living spaces and bedrooms, in study areas, 2 to 3 watts per square meter. You follow those guidelines, you'll make a little bit of a saving compared to the average home. Cooking, the cooking wedge. So the cooking wedge only has one technology, and that is induction cooktop. An induction cooktop, 55% more efficient than a gas cooktop. So again, you get a little bit of a saving on the cooking wedge if you choose induction cooktop. The best thing, however, of choosing induction cooking is this is usually the last gas appliance in the household when you're taking this approach. And if you choose induction cooktop, you can get rid of the gas meter or not get a gas meter and save the owners approximately $1 a day from having a gas connection, and also save the bringing in the gas mains from the plumber's fee, which is good. And the last wedge here is plug-in appliances. So here we're talking about TV, fridge, and white goods. Now, depending on your contract, you may or may not have control over those things. Often in a new home, those things will be sourced, often new, by the owners. And I just find it's quite useful to have a short conversation with owners at that point and just say, you know, we're providing a really energy efficient home. It might be worth your while trying to choose appliances with the higher star ratings. Doesn't necessarily need to be the highest in its field, but just, you know, up there somewhere. If they do that, you'll get a bit of a saving in that appliance wedge as well. And that's it. Look at what we've done just by going around and doing a bunch of different strategies to minimize the amount of energy needed throughout the house. Effectively, if you added that up, and you'd be saving there compared to what originally was about 2/3 of the energy use of the average home, or half, at least a half to 2/3 of the energy use of an average home. The next step, of course, is energy generation and offsetting, and that's what we're going to move on to and look at the particulars of solar, battery, and car charging, and selection of inverters and all that good stuff. So now that we've got the house to not using much energy, to a minimal demand house, we can now look at power production and storage and the mechanics of net zero solar, or should I say monthly net zero solar. What you need to know for a successful solar setup and install. All right, let's get into the real world here. The question, once you've built a house or designed a home.
Jeremy, just before you jump into that bit, we had a question about feed-in tariffs. I'm not sure what you're seeing at the moment around feed-in tariffs, but mine are pretty low that I've seen. This one was around, is it possible to get around 6 cents a kilowatt hour in terms of feed-in tariffs anymore?
Yeah, I think it is. If you shop around, this was a couple of years ago, so things have moved on. Feed-in tariffs are a lot less. I find these days, I was just talking to one of my clients today, and he was saying that his house, he's got batteries, and he was saying today is the best feed-in amount. He's actually with a company called Amber. Amber work on the wholesale market, so they pass on wholesale rates. And at times, at peak times, like cold days like today when the sun's not out, those are high demand days, and then the price goes up with supply and demand. And he was feeding energy out of his battery systems because he didn't need it all into the grid and getting 50 cents a kilowatt back. So that's maybe a better strategy at the moment if you're wanting to get money back from feeding into the grid. But I think the better approach now is to have batteries, and I'll be suggesting cars as well, to dump that power into instead of sending it off for a measly fee. All right. How much power do you need from? So let's answer this question. How much power would you need for monthly net zero if you've adopted this approach of trying to minimize the demand that the house needs? All right. This is what I call now a performance home. Doesn't mean it's not a standard construction. It's just mean it's been built to perform to its energy rating in the first instance, and then been stocked with efficient appliances. So I've got a couple of methods, or two methods for you to consider if you're trying to work out how much power you would need to put on the roof if you want to sort of offer this as a product to the market, or you're talking to clients about it. The first is a bit of a rule of thumb, and it's answering this question: how much power, kilowatt hours, will the house use each day in the middle of winter? Because that's the critical time. You're making plenty of power during summer, but how much power do I need in the middle of winter to run what is now a low demand house? Well, what do we know? We know so far that this low demand house will be using approximately half of an average home. So how much energy does an average home use? Well, to answer this question, the CSIRO did a study back in 2013. It was a 5-year study looking at, I think they had 209 homes around Australia, 62 of those in Victoria, a quantity of those being all electric homes. And this is the data that's come out of measuring their electricity use for 5 years. You can see here, if we look at winter is when that's the season that we use a lot of power down here in Victoria because of heating. We need a lot of heating, so the power use goes up. On the average home, if we average out in that study, it was 35 kilowatts, 0.04 kilowatts hours a day of energy use. But you can see below, if you've got kids, that can go up to 40-ish kilowatts, and for single adults, it's considerably less. So that just goes to show what any parents in this group will know, that kids use a lot of energy. But if we take the 40 kilowatts and we assume that our low demand house will be using about half of that, which is what I've found my clients telling me, we can assume that in the middle of winter, a low demand home or a performance home will be needing somewhere less than 20 kilowatt hours a day. Okay, how does that help us? Well, we know that 1 kilowatt panel in the middle of winter can produce about 2 kilowatt hours a day. Interestingly, in summer, 1 kilowatt panel produces about 5 kilowatt hours a day. It drops off quite a lot in winter. But in winter, 2 kilowatt hours a day for every kilowatt of panel that you put on the roof. So a simple bit of maths, 20 kilowatts is what we need. We divide it by 2 kilowatts and we get 10 kilowatts of panel. So I like to say, as a general rule, put at least 10 kilowatts of panel on the roof. And a little tip here that you might want to up it, just because solar panels and batteries that we talk about later on, this equipment does degrade a little bit over time. So I like to put a little bit of extra buffer just to allow for that degradation in performance over time. Solar panels will last 25 to 30 years, and all the ones sold in Australia under the rebate scheme have to match the criteria that after 25 years they're still producing 80% of their maximum power. But that is a slow degradation over time. So there you go. That would be my tip if it's in the budget. But somewhere around 10, 12 kilowatts is not a bad starting point when considering how much power to put on the roof for monthly net zero outcomes. The other method, if you want to be a little bit more precise, is to go to an energy assessor and ask an assessor, and ask them this particular question. What size PV, photovoltaics, do I need for a monthly net zero outcome? Now, currently, when you ask assessors this, not all of them are going to be able to answer this question. Because not all of the NatHERS tools, there's 4 NatHERS accredited tools. They all work on the same calculation engine, but they have different feature set up front and different front end. And as far as I know at the moment, only the Hero software will allow an assessor to interrogate this question and to work out how much energy the house is using each month and whether it's producing more power than it is using. I'd still suggest you ask your assessor, because they will then be, if they're not already on Hero, they will be asking their software manufacturers, and hopefully they can enable that functionality in the other tools, because I think it's a really useful functionality. The other software you might want to look out for is the Powerhouse app. The Powerhouse app accepts any NatHERS file, and Powerhouse will then load that up for you, and then it allows you to play with the output of the file and try different strategies to improve the performance of the house. You can try increasing windows, increasing eaves, putting in more insulation, all that sort of good stuff, and putting in different more efficient appliances and so forth, and increasing your photovoltaics. So a nice little app for designers in particular. If you're not an energy assessor, this is a really good way to sort of get an idea of what energy assessors are doing, and could also be good for builders who are trying to improve the performance of a design. A tip, however, when you're getting these answers from assessors, this will only be about house performance, and it will be just working on the assumptions built into the tool and the weather files built into the tool. So I always say, whatever the answer that they give, it will be an informed answer, but I would say that you should put on 1 kilowatt more just to, just to allow for the vagaries of real world existence. And also, if you're wanting to charge a car from home, or allow for that, then you'll need an extra 2 kilowatts. 2 kilowatts of panel produces enough power on average every day to charge an electric car to drive approximately 50 kilometers, which is sort of the average urban commute. So that'd be 3 kilowatts of panel that you would put on whatever answer an assessor may give. All right, so that sort of answers how much panel to put on, but how big a space do you need to allow for that? Here's a nice little fact here to keep in mind that can help. It says down here under the solar panel that for every kilowatt of panel that you put on the roof, you need to allow somewhere between 4.5 and 4.9 square meters, depending on the efficiency of the panels. Panels range from about 440 watts to 475 watts, typically these days in most systems. So a 10 kilowatt system, if you look over to the right, is somewhere between 45.5 to 49.1 square meters. You also need to allow 200 millimeters from edges, from ridges, and from eaves. That's just under the guidelines for solar install. When you do it, however, oh, by the way, that was that picture there is 13 kilowatts if you just want to get a visual idea of what sort of size you're looking at there. Consider roof design. So let's have a look at this roof. We've got 48 square meters on the north roof there, another 10 on the smaller back north roof. So 48 plus 10, you'd expect that's 58. If you look at the little factoid bubble square in the right, you'd expect that to give you a 12 kilowatt system. But in reality, when you lay it all out, because it's on an angle, you can only fit 10.56 kilowatts in this particular system. So all this is to show you that roof design now matters. And my tip is that if you're a designer or someone in your design team should now be considering solar panels not as an afterthought, but as a something to design to and design towards. And that will really help it make installs easier. You could, of course, maximize this roof and put more panels on other little parts. Just be aware that typically when you're grouping panels together, that will become a little, what they call a string, a little group of panels in series, and you need at least 4 panels typically to have enough voltage to activate the string. So you can't use tiny little bits of roof. It also becomes more expensive if you put little bits of panel everywhere. Not, I would I would argue it's not as aesthetically pleasing as well. All right. So our next question when you're thinking about design for roofs, what's the best angle for PV? So what you're looking at there, that graph, is a graph that I used back in the day when the first version of the Your Home manual came out, a little thin version it was. And back then, solar panels were very expensive. So you wanted to try and get them in the best possible position you could, which was due north and then tilted to the latitude of your site. At Canberra, their latitude is 35 degrees, so you'd tilt to 35. Victoria's 37, you'd tilt to 37. However, the cost of panels has come down relative to the cost of tilting or changing the roof structure, or putting on little legs to tilt things up. So these days, the rule of thumb is just to use the roof slope that you've got and work with that. And it's cheaper typically to add more panels onto a roof slope that's not quite right or a direction not quite right than to try and do everything perfectly. If you look, if I just explain a little bit how this graph works, if it is due north, you get 100%. But if you start moving away from due north, there's this big tilting to the east or the west. It's a big area of 90% efficiency of that panel. You get 90% of its possible power out, up to 60 degrees either way. So that's quite a big latitude. Even if you moved right across to here where it's not, where it's on east, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you moved right across to east, you'd still be in an 80% band. So you might drop, 15 to 20% of the power going east or west. So there's a lot of flexibility. Even if you went south and you had a flat roof, you went south and you go flat, you're still in this sort of 80% band doing that. So with the cost of panels these days, really most roof surfaces are up for consideration. So north is best, but all directions are worth considering. East and west can extend generation hours. Yeah, so even though you lose a little bit of efficiency, at the start of the day, if you've got eastern panels, you'll get a bit of a bump in your energy production. And if you've got western panels, at the end of the day, you'll get a bit of a bump at the end of the day with those panels. So that can extend the useful solar production of your system. So something to consider. Roof slopes above 10 degrees, I would just be using the roof pitch. If it's less than 10 degrees though, I still would be aiming for legs, not for more energy production, but simply for cleaning. You need a bit of a slope on panels so that rain, when it falls, has enough force to clean the panels and clean the dust off the panels so they keep performing. So there's just some angles, rules of thumb to consider. Another thing to consider with panels is shading. Most panels that you see on roofs are using something called a string inverter. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But string inverters typically will have these groups of panels that are all daisy chained together in series. And if any one of those panels gets shade on it, because of this daisy chaining, it means that the output from that whole string of panels, whole group of panels, is reduced to the poorest performing panel. So shade can have a big effect if you've got a long group of a long string, a lot of panels on a string. It can have a big effect on your power production. So what to do? The basic general rule here is watch out for things that can shade onto your panels. Chimneys, trees, other buildings, plumbing vents. I've had it a lot of times that if you don't tell the plumber to make sure that plumbing vents are on and that there are no vents on the sunward side of the panels, that little note up there shows. If you don't physically tell them that several times, they will put the plumbing stack vent pipe right bang in where you want to put solar panels. Just a little tip there. However, what happens if you do have shade on the roof? Well, there are other alternatives to the string inverter. Here on the right, you can see a string inverter. It's probably what you're used to seeing. There are also micro inverters and solar optimizers. These are little tiny units that sit on the back of each panel, and they make each panel sort of independent. So they're not all operating together as one string. They're all operating as independent units, so that if you get shade on just one panel, well, that panel performance goes down, but the rest still operate if they're out of the shade. So something to consider if you're in shade. Ask your installer to consider microinverters or solar optimizers, or at least get their opinion on it. Also, when you're looking at inverters, whatever type you get, I would always push for a 10 years parts and labor warranty. A lot of deals these days you'll see pushing only 5 years, but if you look around, put a little pressure on, you can usually get 10 years deals. And that's what I'd be going for. Just because the inverter works really hard and is one of the things that is likely, if something's going to break down, it's probably likely to be an inverter. All right, this brings us to think about the power supply to the house. People often ask me, do I need to go three-phase with an all-electric home like this? And the answer is, in most suburbs, yes, you will probably need to. If you're only getting a single-phase 40 amp connection or a single-phase 63 amp connection, that will probably not be enough by the time the electrician adds up all the peak loads, which he does a calculation, adds up the peak loads in the house of all the air conditioners turned on, the hot water, heating hard, and the induction cooktop on. And by the time you put all these things together, it usually trips over the calculation to requiring three-phase. This, however, is not a bad thing. Three-phase has some benefits. The first benefit is faster car charging. And as we move to electric cars becoming the norm, and they're the fastest seller by a long way at the moment, is electric cars. Huge increase in electric car sales. Charging speeds at home, future-proofing so that you can charge cars quickly, especially as batteries get bigger, is, I think, pretty important. And with three-phase supply, you can charge up to 22 kilowatt AC. To put that in perspective, a standard home on single phase can only charge 7 kilowatts. So effectively, you can charge 3 times as fast. So what might take, say, 12 hours for a standard EV to charge up on single phase plugged in at a house would only take 4 hours, which may be useful if you're, needing to go on a quick trip. So that's a good benefit of three-phase. Single phase, though, if you're having a smaller house or maybe renovation, you might still be able to get by with single phase, or if you're in maybe an 80 amp single phase connection, if you're in an area that can provide that, you can possibly stay with single phase. They are cheaper. In that case, you'd use a single phase inverter rather than three-phase inverter. And a single phase inverter does have one major benefit, and it's in a backup situation. So in a backup situation, the grid has gone down and all you've got is your battery powering the house. Now, let's say we've got a 10 kilowatt single phase inverter. That means that the maximum that it can provide to the house in instantaneous power is 10 kilowatts. Now, 10 kilowatts gives quite a lot of headroom for appliances. You can plug in a lot of appliances and have a lot of things running before you get to 10 kilowatts. So effectively, you've got less chance of the system tripping if you're trying to back up, say, the whole house. However, for a three-phase inverter has the phases are just 3 different lines of power that go throughout the house, and it balances those lines by splitting up that 10 kilowatts into 3.3 kilowatts per phase in this instance. And that means that if you are trying to back up the whole house on a three-phase inverter, you might find that if you put an air conditioner on and the hot water system is heating and someone puts on the induction cooktop or puts on a kettle or something, that might put it over the 3.3 kilowatts of power, and it might trip the system, and all of a sudden all the power would go off and you have to go and reset the system, put the buttons back on, pull the switches down again or put them up again. So here's a little tip. If you do go three-phase, I would still suggest three-phase is better on balance, but I tend to upsize the size of the inverter. So If my system that I'm being quoted has a 10 kilowatt inverter, I'd probably upsize if it's 3-phase to 12 kilowatts or 15 kilowatts. Most of the time, it won't make any difference, but in that grid down backup situation, it means that everything keeps running easily for the clients and they don't need to worry too much about, what things they got on, what things they don't. All right, how much battery capacity do you need for monthly net zero? So I've looked at panels. Now let's look at batteries. Okay, so in our performance home, we worked out that in winter we would need 20 kilowatt hours a day of power produced by 10 kilowatt plus of panels up on the roof. Okay, so that's what we're producing every day, but how much do we need to be able to store for use at nighttime? How much of that 20 kilowatts is used at nighttime? Yeah, there's that question. How much does 20 kilowatts use at nighttime? Exactly, word for word. Remembered the slide. So let's look again at the Australian Housing Data Portal from that CSIRO study. And if you want to look at it, there's the link down there. The Australian Housing Portal, Household Housing Portal, is a pretty interesting place if you're into numbers. But here we have this is the average house and the energy it uses over a 24-hour period in Victoria in June. And it's that red line that we're interested in this picture. Now, in June, we've probably got, the sun goes down definitely by 6, probably not producing anything useful until about 8 o'clock. So if I shade out what is the nighttime part of underneath that graph and think about what that shading area is compared to if we shaded the whole area underneath the graph, which is the total that the house uses on average, you'd say that about 60% of energy use is typically at nighttime in June, in the middle of winter. All right, that gives us a bit of a metric that we can use to plan our batteries. If we're using 20 kilowatts over the whole day, but 60% of 20 kilowatts hour over the whole day, but 60% of that is being used at nighttime, then 20 kilowatts times 60% means that we need to have at least 12 kilowatt hours of storage. So I'd be suggesting there 12 kilowatts plus of battery size. Now, all of these that I'm giving you are not gospel. They are sort of based on my experience working with the homes that we've been doing, over the last 5 to 10 years. I guess we've been heading towards this net zero path. We've been operating for over 20 years, but before then it was all about reducing demand. It's only recently that this technology has become cost effective. However, if you're in a different state, use these as a bit of a guideline, if you like, in how to think about how much power, how much size, how much panel, how much battery that you might need to achieve monthly net zero outcomes, if you want to offer that as a product to the market. Also consider that at the moment we've got a federal battery rebate scheme. It has been reduced. It was 30% that the government would rebate you up to 50 kilowatts of battery. And a lot of people then were putting in very big batteries and they're blowing through the government's budget. So they rolled that back to 30% rebate for the first 14 kilowatt hours of battery capacity storage. Then you get 18% for the next 14 kilowatt hours, and above 28, you will get 4.5% rebate. So given that there's a rebate on, my tip at the moment would be to upsize to 14 kilowatts to maximize rebate and allow for degradation over time. And as you saw in that case study I showed you, they had a 13 kilowatt battery. So that is enough if you've lowered the demand of your home, typically, to achieve these monthly net zero, or at least close to monthly net zero. The other nice thing about the way that batteries are going these days, they're now very modular and they're building these module towers, which means that if you decide you want extra capacity later, it's simply a matter of ringing up the company and they'll send around an installer to just put another brick-sized module in, 5 kilowatts, maybe 8 kilowatts at a time, and just build your tower up taller. So it's quite flexible at the moment. Now, when thinking about batteries, and if you're deciding to go down this route of including batteries, you should be considering it from the start, because there are some design elements that you need to consider as to where you can actually put batteries. If you don't consider this and you're in some sort of inner urban area and you're using weatherboards, you'll find it very hard to actually find a spot where you can put legally a battery system, and you won't be able to. So these are some rules to bear in mind. This is from the Australian standards for the placement of battery energy storage systems, or BESS. Basically just means a battery and associated inverters and paraphernalia. So your battery needs to have offsets around it. If you see that figure 4.1, 600 millimeters either side for ventilation and 900 millimeters above. So nothing is allowed in those areas. You're not allowed to have windows, certainly not allowed to have doors. You're not allowed to be under stairs or in ceiling spaces, and not in paths of exit. So if you have to exit past this thing to get out of the house, they don't like that, just in case your battery catches on fire and it closes the exit. So a few rules, you can read the rest of them there. The other main thing to consider is if your battery is backing onto a habitable room, it must be non-combustible. And only these materials comply with the standard. They are brick, concrete, compressed cement sheeting, or tiles. So you want to consider that in the design of the home, rather than putting an ugly compressed sheet square behind the battery, against your nice new cladding. Last tip that's not in the standard is that batteries don't like to be heated and cooled too much. So put it in a location that minimizes temperature extremes, and that will just extend out the life of the battery for the owners. And this brings us to backup and resilience. Now, it's a fact that a lot of systems, in fact, most solar systems at the moment that you see, even ones with batteries, if there's a blackout, that solar system will stop producing and the house will black out. If you have a battery, you may very well find that the house keeps running until the battery goes flat and then the system blacks out. So instead of that, and that's a design feature to stop when the utility sends out someone to fix the lines in the blackout, to stop power coming down the line inadvertently from someone's solar system and electrocuting the linesman there. However, you can make it so that your house continues operating during a blackout. And these are the things that you want to look for. You want to look for systems that mention blackout protection and black start ability. So if the system does go completely dead and the sun comes out and the solar comes on, it will charge things up and the house will start moving again and start again. So look out for those words. Also ask if the inverter supports islanding capabilities. In the past, you had to get a separate islanding device, but inverters these days, the modern ones, have this islanding capability built within them. So choose one that does. Ask the question. And importantly, ask this question. I'd probably ask it in writing to your preferred installer. Will the house run off solar during a blackout? And will batteries be able to charge off excess solar during a blackout? Basically, will the house just be able to continue to function? Now, that's important questions for the system itself. The other thing is what should still be running during a blackout. What you're looking at here, this top picture really just gives that idea. I used to use this when you needed a separate gateway device, but this is that idea of islanding, that the solar panels continue to run, continue to charge batteries, and potentially in the future charge cars in this V2H, or vehicle to house setup, which I'll talk about in a second. But now that's built into the inverter. However, for backup, you still have two choices. Most backups that you will find use what's called a resilience circuit. So they're not designed to back up the whole house, because in the past systems were small, batteries were small, and you didn't have enough power to back up a whole house. So you just chose to back up important functions that would continue operating to make life go on during a blackout. And they were lights, because LEDs don't use much power. Ceiling fan, so you get a bit of cooling potential during summer at a low wattage. The refrigerator, so you can keep your food cold. Power points, particularly in the kitchen, so you can plug in a microwave and get some cooking going. And the computer and your Wi-Fi, so you've got connection to the outside world. And that's all, and can continue functioning. That's a resilient circuit. However, I would suggest that with a net monthly, a net zero or monthly net zero home, all electric home, these days I'm looking more towards whole house backup. And there's now 3-phase inverter battery systems that are whole house ready. And that makes it a lot easier in that the electrician still needs to balance the loads on a 3-phase supply as they normally would, but you don't need to separately make sure that all these items are on their own little backup system. So in some ways it's easier. However, as I said before, if you're using a 3-phase inverter, you can do this obviously on single phase if you've got a single phase supply. But if you are doing it on 3-phase, just remember to upsize that inverter a little bit bigger perhaps than the solar company initially put down. I would say 12 kilowatts or 15 kilowatts is a better size for give you a little bit more headroom. That would be 5 kilowatts for each of the phases equals 15. That's a fair bit of headroom so that you can operate without going over the limit of capacity in a blackout. And that brings us now, we've talked about the componentry. It brings us to some tips I'd give you for a good install. The first one, the most important one, is to make safety number one. You're up on roofs, the installers are holding big panels that can get caught by the wind, and quite quickly you could be looking at a very serious accident indeed. Make sure that either you've done a swims with them, with the installers who come on site, or the installers, better yet, have provided you with swims, and no one can start work until that is done and signed off and in your files. That's very important. Here you can see we've got a 2-story house. We've got a cherry picker that the installers used. They had a section of portable temporary fencing that they would move along as they placed panels, and the installers up on the roof, they would go up in harness, so there would be someone passing the panel across and someone on the roof in a harness all the time. So it was very safely done. We even had a spotter out there on the road. So anyway, just consider safety. Next things for a good install is really to look at the system that you're being quoted and just do a quick check to make sure that the system components are all certified products under the Clean Energy Council. They're the ones who manage the rebates, and you should make sure that what you're putting in is quality stuff. It's simply a matter of going to each one of the little database tables that they have and just checking that what you've been quoted is on there. Also check that the installer is a member of the Clean Energy Council and has this approved seller, New Energy Tech approved seller badge. That just is a higher standard that is very consumer focused. So if they've got that tick, it's pretty good. You're pretty likely to have a good installer if they've got that tick. Next, I would check that the warranties that come through on the quote are good. These are the warranties I'd be looking out for. 25-year product warranty on the panels. This one also came with a 30-year performance warranty, which is nice to have. The inverter, I'd be looking at 10-year product warranty, as I mentioned before. Batteries, again, a 10-year product warranty. And the installation company, I blocked out the name there, but this solar company provides a 5-year whole of system warranty on the operation and performance of the complete solar system and 10 years of workmanship warranty on installation. So those are the warranties that I would be looking for on the system. The way we do it, if you're interested, we just put it as a provisional sum in the contract, and I do the initial quoting to get a system that I think will perform to these sort of sizes and specs. And then I pass off to the owner. They have a look at it, talk to the installer. They might make some improvements from there, or typically they'll choose a bigger battery size from there once they look at the rebate. And then later on, I get the client to pay for the product and just reimburse out of the provisional sum at the next payment stage. And obviously any costs and effort that I have, our company's endured in doing this, we can claim under the provisional sum. So that's a nice, easy way to do it. It keeps it very clean because it's the client who is buying the product for getting these rebates. It makes it much easier if it's in the client's name. Next, I would also check your electrical layout is nice and easy as far as the systems of the solar, the battery, and the car charger. If you look down here, you can see in the garage, we've got the battery and the inverter stack there. You've got a little dot showing the bollard to stop it being hit. We've got the switchboard in there as well, nice and close if we need to put more connections through, or later on we're wanting to do vehicle to house or to put on smart chargers. The wiring will be nice and easy to do because it's nice and close. And the charger is also nice and close. Now, when you're talking about chargers and setting up for home car charging, the rule of thumb is this: just put a note on your plans, something to this effect. 32 amp cable in conduit to run from your car charger located in the switchboard. That's the SB switchboard in this picture. Ends to be terminated and coiled behind plaster for later connection. That's if the owners don't already have an electric car. You've just put in the wall just in case. And 9 spare switches to be left vacant in switchboard for later connection and hookup of charger. Now, you don't necessarily need 9 for the charge. You probably only need 3 spare switches to hook up a car charger. If it's a smart car charger, it might also come with some sort of smart meter ring contraption that goes into the switchboard as well. That might take another 3 switches. And I'm just allowing a little bit extra in case later on when we have bi-directional charging back from the car to the house, maybe you'll need some more switches. That's how I come up with my 9. But really the rule of thumb with switchboards, the more space, the better. The next thing to ask yourself is, should you pre-cable or not pre-cable? Should you put in the cables at rough-in stage or not? And the answer is yes. If you want a nicer finish, you certainly should put them in at rough-in stage, but there's an extra cost to it. Most of the industry is not set up to do a 2-stage install. They're set up for existing homes, and all installs just want to do is come and put on in panels and the kit and get out of there all in one day if they can. So one, you're going to pay extra just to get them on site a second time. Secondly, the new rules for solar installs require mechanical protection for all exposed wires. And when you got the plaster off at frame stage, that's all exposed wires. So it costs quite a lot to run things internally. Having said that, if there's the budget to do it, then it's a better finish. On this particular job, we had the panels on the north roof, which was the side to the left. We ran the conduit over the back of the roof where you don't see it very much, down the blind side of the house, come out through the pergola roof, or the carport roof, and it goes to the inverter and the battery. So you do see some conduit on the wall, but it's pretty acceptable given where it is in the house. And this was more of a budget, let's say a cost-effective job to put in. You can see as well from the 3-phase switchboard, the switchboard is on the other side of the wall here. From that 3-phase switchboard, we've run a 32 amp cable down and terminated it with a 32 amp plug. Later on, when the owners do get an electric car and they get a smart charger, the electrician will just take off that and put a smart charger where that is. And then they can get the 22 kilowatt AC charging. This just shows the components on this particular job. You can see the switchboard has spare spaces left over here. This is the cable to the right. That's what a 32 amp cable looks like. And that's a plug that I would normally put in a 3-phase plug on the outside. But it gets changed over later. And a bollard, just to protect some mechanical protection. You don't want to hit your battery with a car. That could be bad. That brings us to the very last thing I want to talk about, and that is the future. With car charging and V2H, which stands for vehicle to house, I've mentioned a couple of times in passing. Vehicle to house really will change the way people look at homes and look at cars. Homes will become your gas station for your house, and businesses as well. You'll look for where to plug in, and if we're considering, before we were talking about batteries and batteries size of around 12 kilowatt hours or 14 kilowatt hours, cars have a very large battery. I want to show you one. This one is actually already vehicle to house ready. It's set up with bi-directional charging infrastructure available now on the Australian market. It's the Volvo EX90. Now, this is a premium car, but at this stage, but this is just a sign of things to come. This car has 111 kilowatt hours of battery. So powering this house at night off what's in the battery, it won't even notice the dint in that. Still have plenty of power to go a long way the next day. And to change this car over to vehicle to house simply will take a software patch. The other thing that you will need is a bi-directional charger. So instead of a smart charger, which is just a one-way charger at the moment, you'll be putting a bi-directional charger, or the clients, the owners, will be putting a bi-directional charger in, and then it will be accepting power back from the car to then feed into the switchboard and feed into the house overnight. So that's where things are heading. They're just doing some testing at the moment. They've got some studies running, and they really just need to work out. They've got the protocols all sorted. As far as I understand at the moment, they just need to work out the warranty situation with car batteries, not just being used for cars, but also being used for the house as well, and how that might affect car warranties and how that's all going to work. But it's coming, so watch out for that. And that, everybody, I told you it was going to be a bit of a long one. There was a lot of ground to cover there. But that brings us to the last summary of where we've been. The recipe for an all-electric monthly net zero home. And it's simply this: good design coupled with quality construction. So you get a high-performing fabric and meet your Energy Star rating, and then fitting the house out with efficient appliances to lower the demand. Once you've done that, add on solar panels. I would suggest 10 kilowatts plus for monthly net zero. Inverter size, I'd suggest 12 kilowatts, and I favour three-phase systems. You'll probably need to use three-phase power anyway in an all-electric home. Batteries, 12 kilowatts plus with backup. I like to use, I'm heading towards whole home backups. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. And lastly, set up for car charging with three-phase. And that is the recipe for what potentially could be, with maybe a little bit of marketing thrown in, a whole new product for the industry. So welcome to your new home. It's a low-cost living lifestyle with free power for your house and transport, so you can spend your money on what really matters. It's a resilient energy hub, with blackouts being a thing of the past. It's a grid-friendly smart home supporting the green transition. And lastly, it's a carbon negative footprint, doing your bit for a brighter future. And that brings us to the end, Phil. The future is here.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. Massive amount of information in there. With Jeremy's permission, we will make the webinar available. It is being recorded, so you can go through at your own pace and pull out the bits of interest to you, because certainly they're the sorts of questions we're starting to get every day. It's a glimpse into where we're heading with our homes and how we're building these homes and how they're going to operate, talk to our cars and talk to our batteries and talk to our hot water systems and the rest of the appliances in our house. Soon to take over, Jeremy. But certainly lots of really useful information. So I just want to thank Jeremy again. I can hear the cheering in the background and the clapping, Jeremy, in the background. Thanks for those of you who came and stuck it out. As Jeremy warned us at the beginning, there was a huge amount of information there. And a lot to get through there as well. But it covers off a lot of the things we hear every day. It makes that information